The arena floor was covered with sand that had been stained dark red from countless battles, and the morning sun created long shadows between the massive stone walls that rose up toward the purple sky. Jinwoo squinted as he walked through the entrance gate, trying to see the crowd of aliens that filled every seat in the huge coliseum. Their voices created a sound like thunder that seemed to shake the ground beneath his feet. The Vorthan spectators came in many different shapes and sizes, but they all had the same hungry look in their eyes as they waited for blood to be spilled. Some had scales like reptiles, and others had fur or feathers or skin that seemed to change color as Jinwoo watched. Many of them were holding small devices that he realized were used for placing bets on which fighter would win and how they would die. Across the arena floor, another gate began to open, and Jinwoo could hear something massive moving in the darkness beyond. The crowd grew quieter as they waited for their champion to appear, and Jinwoo felt his heart beating faster as he gripped his dull sword with sweaty hands. The leather armor felt heavy and awkward on his body, and he wished he had more time to get used to wearing it. The bone crusher stepped into the sunlight, and Jinwoo had to fight not to take a step backward. The creature was even larger than Vel had described, standing almost 13 feet tall with a body that looked like a giant praying mantis covered in thick, black armor. Its 4 arms ended in claws that were each as long as Jinwoo's sword, and its head was dominated by huge compound eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. The crowd erupted in cheers as their champion raised all 4 arms and let out a roar that sounded like metal being torn apart. The Bone Crusher had killed 53 opponents in the arena and had never been seriously injured in any fight. Some of its victims had been experienced warriors from military worlds, but they had all died screaming under its claws. Jinwoo took a deep breath and tried to remember everything Vel had told him about fighting larger opponents. The key was to stay mobile and avoid getting caught in the creature's powerful grasp. He also remembered stories his grandmother had told him about his grandfather fighting against overwhelming odds and never giving up, even when victory seemed impossible. The arena master announced the fight in the Vorthan language, and translators around the Colosseum repeated the words in dozens of different alien tongues. The crowd was told that they were about to witness the destruction of another primitive human, and that bets could still be placed on how long the fight would last. Most aliens were betting that Jinwoo would die within the first minute. A horn sounded to signal the beginning of the battle, and the Bone Crusher immediately charged across the sand, moving much faster than something so large should have been able to move. Its claws left deep gouges in the arena floor, and its roar echoed off the stone walls as it closed the distance between them in just a few seconds. Instead of running or freezing with fear, Jinwoo did something that surprised everyone in the arena, including himself. He stepped to the side at the last possible moment and brought his sword down hard on the joint where one of the creature legs connected to its body. The blade bit deep into the soft tissue between armor plates, and dark green blood splattered across the sand. The Bone Crusher stumbled and spun around to face Jinwoo again, but now it was favoring one leg and moving more carefully. The crowd had gone completely silent, because no one had ever seen their champion injured. In the opening moments of a fight, Jinwoo could see confusion in the creature compound eyes as it tried to understand how such a small opponent had managed to hurt it. The young human did not wait for the Bone Crusher to recover from its surprise. He moved in a wide circle around the creature, staying just out of reach of its claws and looking for other weak spots in its armor. He noticed that the joints where its arms connected to its shoulders were also less protected, and he began to form a plan. The Bone Crusher lunged forward with all 4 arms spread wide, trying to grab Jinwoo in a crushing embrace, but the human dropped low and rolled between its legs, coming up behind it before it could turn around. Jinwoo slashed at the tendons in the creature hind legs and was rewarded with another spray of green blood and a roar of pain and anger. Now the arena champion was bleeding from 3 different wounds and having trouble moving as quickly as before. The crowd began to murmur with excitement because they had never seen a fight last this long or seen their champion take so much damage. Some aliens were shouting encouragement to Jinwoo, while others were demanding that the Bone Crusher finish him quickly. The creature tried a different approach and began swinging its claws in wide arcs, trying to hit Jinwoo even if it could not grab him. But the human had learned to read its movements, and he ducked under the swinging arms and struck at its wrists and forearms. Whenever he saw an opening, his sword was becoming dull from hitting the creature armor, but it was still sharp enough to find the soft spots between plates. For almost 10 minutes, the battle continued with Jin Woo using hit-and-run tactics while the Bone Crusher grew more desperate and clumsy. The creature was losing blood and strength, while Jin Woo remained focused and alert, using everything his instincts told him about fighting and survival. Finally, the Bone Crusher made a mistake and overextended itself with a massive four-armed attack that left its entire torso exposed. Jin Woo stepped inside its guard and drove his sword deep into the soft tissue under its chin. The blade pierced something vital, and the creature let out a final roar before collapsing onto the bloody sand. The arena fell completely silent for several seconds as 50,000 aliens stared at the impossible sight of their undefeated champion lying motionless on the ground. Then the silence exploded into chaos as some spectators cheered, while others shouted in anger at losing their bets. Jin Woo stood over his fallen opponent, breathing hard, but victorious, holding his grandfather dog tag in his free hand. The Vorthen capital city stretched out like a massive spiderweb of purple metal and glowing lights as their transport ship landed on a platform high above the streets. Jin Woo could see thousands of flying vehicles moving between tall buildings that twisted up toward the sky like frozen tornadoes. The air outside smelled like ozone and chemicals and made his nose burn when he breathed. Vorthen guards in black armor dragged him and the other prisoners from their cages and forced them to walk through corridors that led deep underground. The guards spoke to each other in their clicking language, and Jin Woo could tell they were making jokes about the prisoners because they kept looking at him and making sounds that the translator said were laughter. One guard poked Jin Woo with an energy stick that sent painful shocks through his body just to see him jump. The underground area beneath the arena was like a maze of stone tunnels and metal doors that led to rows of cells where prisoners were kept before their fights. Jin Woo was pushed into a small room that had a hard bench for sleeping and a hole in the floor for waste. The walls were covered with scratch marks and stains that he did not want to think about too much. A small window near the ceiling let in light from the arena above, and he could hear the distant sound of crowds cheering. In the cell next to his was an old creature that looked like it might have been related to Keth, but was much smaller and had scars covering most of its body. The creature introduced itself as Vel and said it had survived 3 fights in the arena, which made it almost legendary among the prisoners. Most beings died in their first fight, and very few lived long enough to see a second battle. Vel told Jin Woo that he would probably face the Bone Crusher, which was the arena current champion. The Bone Crusher was a massive insect-like creature with 4 arms and claws that could cut through metal armor like paper. It stood over 12 feet tall and had never lost a fight in more than 50 battles. The crowd loved the Bone Crusher because it always found creative ways to kill its opponents and made their deaths last as long as possible. The guards brought Jin Woo a set of leather armor that was cracked and stained with old blood and a metal sword that was dull and had chips in the blade. He could tell that the equipment was designed to make fights more difficult, not to actually protect the fighters. The armor would not stop a serious attack, and the sword would probably break if he hit anything hard with it. While he examined his equipment, Jin Woo found himself thinking about the stories his grandmother had told him about his grandfather during the Korean War. She had said that soldiers often had to fight with whatever weapons they could find, and that the best fighters were not always the ones with the best equipment, but the ones who could think quickly and adapt to any situation. Vel asked him about the metal chain around his neck, and Jin Woo explained that it had belonged to his grandfather, who had been a soldier in an old war on Earth. Vel did not understand much about human history, but he could see that the metal tag was important to Jin Woo and that it seemed to give him strength. The old creature had learned to read the signs of which prisoners might survive, and which ones would die quickly, and there was something different about this young human. Jin Woo began doing exercises in his cell to prepare his body for the fight. He did push-ups and stretches and practiced moving in the heavy leather armor. The other prisoners thought he was wasting his time because they believed the fights were hopeless, but Jin Woo remembered more stories his grandmother had told him about military training. She had said his grandfather always stayed in good physical condition because a soldier never knew when he would need to fight. The guards came to get prisoners for fights throughout the day, and Jin Woo could hear the sounds of battle from above. Sometimes the crowds cheered and sometimes they booed, but every fight ended with silence that meant someone had died. The guards always came back alone, never with prisoners who had won their fights. and Jinwoo realized that even winning might not mean survival in this place. As night fell on the alien world, Jinwoo lay on his hard bench and listened to the sounds of the other prisoners. Some were crying, and some were praying to gods from their home worlds, and some were just silent with fear. He touched the metal tag around his neck and tried to remember everything his grandmother had taught him about his grandfather. Courage and determination. Tomorrow, he would face the bone crusher in front of thousands of aliens who wanted to see him die. But tonight he made plans and prepared his mind for battle. He thought about his family and his home and all the reasons he had to survive. He did not know that in the royal viewing boxes above the arena, Fourth officers were already placing bets on how quickly he would die, or that they saw him as nothing more than entertainment. Jinwoo fell asleep, thinking about his grandfather and wondering if the old soldier had ever felt this afraid before a battle. He hoped that somewhere his grandfather's spirit was watching over him and would give him the strength to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The metal tag felt warm against his chest, like a small piece of home in this terrible alien place. Jinwoo opened his eyes slowly and felt cold metal against his skin. The world around him was moving and shaking like he was inside some kind of vehicle, but this was not like any car or truck he had ever seen before. The walls were made of strange, purple metal that seemed to glow with its own light, and the air smelled like burnt plastic, mixed with something sweet that made his stomach feel sick. He tried to sit up, but his head hit metal bars above him. He was inside a cage that was barely big enough for him to lie down, and his clothes were torn and dirty, and he could taste blood in his mouth from where someone had hit him during the capture. 3 days ago, he had been working on his family farm on the outer colony world of New Seoul, when the alien ships appeared in the sky like angry storm clouds. The Vorthon soldiers had come down from their ships in small flying vehicles that made no sound at all. They wore armor that looked like it was made from black glass, and their faces were hidden behind masks that glowed red where their eyes should be. Jinwoo had tried to run when he saw them taking other people from the farms, but they had shot him with some kind of weapon that made his whole body freeze up like ice. He could not move or speak, but he could still see and hear everything that happened to him. Now he was somewhere in space, traveling to a place he did not know. The cage next to him held a creature that looked like a giant lizard with blue scales and yellow eyes. It was about the same size as Jinwoo, but its hands ended in long claws that could probably cut through metal. The creature had been watching him since he woke up, and now it spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. The words came through a small device attached to the cage that changed the alien language into something Jinwoo could understand. The lizard creature said its name was Keth, and that they were all going to the same terrible place the Vorthon Empire used, prisoners from different worlds to fight in gladiator games for the entertainment of their people. Most prisoners died in their first fight, and the few who lived longer were kept alive only to die more interesting deaths. Later, Jinwoo touched the metal chain around his neck without thinking about it. The small rectangular piece of metal that hung from the chain was warm against his fingers. It had belonged to his grandfather, who had died when Jinwoo was very young, but his grandmother had given it to him on his 18th birthday just 2 months ago. She had told him stories about his grandfather, who had been a soldier in something called the Korean War on old Earth, long before humans had traveled to other planets. His grandmother always said that his grandfather had been very brave and had saved many of his friends during the war, but Jinwoo had never really understood what that meant. War seemed like something from history books, not something that could happen to regular people like farmers. But now, as he sat in this alien cage flying through space toward almost certain death, he began to understand that war was not just something that happened to other people long ago. The ship shook again, and Jinwoo could hear the Vorthon soldiers talking in their clicking language somewhere above his cage. They sounded excited, like children talking about a new toy they were going to play with. He knew that he was that toy, and the thought made him feel cold inside, but also angry. These aliens had taken him from his home and his family, and now they were going to make him fight for their amusement. Keth told him more about the arena while they traveled. The gladiator fights were held on the capital world of the Vorthon Empire in a huge building that could hold more than 50,000 spectators. The fighters were given simple weapons and armor, and then forced to battle creatures or other prisoners until only one was left alive. The crowd loved to see blood and death, and they cheered loudest when someone died in a particularly painful or dramatic way. Jin Woo asked Keth if anyone had ever escaped from the arena, but the lizard creature just made a sound that the translator turned into bitter laughter. He said that the arena was surrounded by force fields and guards, and even if someone could get out of the fighting area, they would still be trapped on a planet full of enemies with nowhere to run. The only way out was to keep winning fights until you became too valuable to risk in the arena, but that almost never happened because the fights were designed to kill the prisoners, not make them famous. The young human closed his eyes and tried to think about his family and his home, but all he could see were the Vorthan ships in the sky and the red glow of their weapons. The metal tag around his neck seemed to grow warmer, and he found himself thinking about his grandfather again. His grandmother had said that even when things seemed hopeless, his grandfather had never given up. He had kept fighting even when he was outnumbered and surrounded by enemies. Jin Woo did not know if he was brave like his grandfather had been, but he knew that he did not want to die in some alien arena for the entertainment of creatures who saw him as nothing more than an animal. He would find a way to survive and maybe even find a way to escape. He had to believe that was possible because the alternative was too terrible to think about. The ship began to slow down and change direction, and Keth said they were probably getting close to their destination. Through a small window in the side of the cargo area, Jin Woo could see a huge planet that was mostly purple and red with 3 small moons orbiting around it. The planet looked beautiful from space, but he knew it was going to be the most dangerous place he had ever been. As the ship entered the planet atmosphere, Jin Woo felt the metal tag against his chest and made himself a promise he would honor his grandfather's memory by fighting as hard as he could and never giving up no matter how hopeless things seemed. He did not know that this simple piece of metal would soon change everything, not just for him, but for the entire galaxy. In the royal viewing box high above the arena floor, General Mordak of the Vorthan Imperial Fleet lowered his viewing scope and stared at the human boy with growing unease. Something about the way Jin Woo had fought bothered him in a way he could not immediately explain. The young prisoner had not fought like an animal, or even like an untrained civilian. He had moved with purpose and tactical awareness that suggested military training. General Mordak had served in the Vorthan military for over 30 years and had studied the fighting techniques of dozens of different alien species. He knew the difference between luck and skill, between desperation and discipline. What he had just witnessed was not a fluke victory by a terrified farm boy, but a calculated battle fought by someone who understood combat at a fundamental level. Sub-Commander Kelvis stood beside his superior officer, equally disturbed by what they had seen. The sub-commander was responsible for intelligence, gathering about new species and potential threats to the Empire, and something about this human victory reminded him of reports he had read in the classified military archives, reports that most Vorthan officers preferred to forget. Down in the arena, Jin Woo was being roughly handled by the guards who were supposed to escort him back to his cell. The young human was exhausted from his fight and did not resist when they grabbed his arms and began dragging him toward the exit. But in their haste to remove him from the arena floor, one of the guards caught the chain around Jin Woo's neck with an armored glove. The thin metal chain snapped, and the small rectangular tag that had belonged to Jin Woo's grandfather fell onto the bloody sand with a soft metallic sound that was lost in the noise of the crowd. The guard did not notice what had happened and continued dragging the prisoner away, but Sub-Commander Kelvis had been watching through his scope and had seen the tag fall. Kelvis immediately sent a message to the arena floor requesting that the fallen object be retrieved and brought to him for examination. Within minutes, a servant had found the small metal rectangle and carried it up to the royal viewing box. The sub-commander took the tag and connected it to a portable translation and analysis device that could identify unknown materials and decode alien writing. The device worked for several minutes, processing the information contained in the small piece of metal while General Mordak waited impatiently for results. He was beginning to suspect that this human prisoner was more than he appeared to be, and the dog tag might contain information that would confirm his fears. When the analysis was complete, the device displayed its findings on a small screen that made both Vorthan officers go pale beneath their scaled skin. The tag contained not just identification information, but also genetic markers and family history that painted a terrifying picture of exactly who they had captured. The tag identified Jin Woo as the grandson of Lee Hyun-soo, who had been a decorated soldier in something called the Korean War on the human homeworld of Earth. The genetic analysis showed that Jin Woo carried specific DNA markers that were associated with exceptional combat ability and tactical intelligence. More importantly, the tag contained references to military unit designations and battle honors that Sub-Commander Kelvis recognized from classified reports general. Mordek immediately ordered his aide to access the most secret files in the Vorthon military database information that was restricted to only the highest-ranking officers in the Empire. What those files revealed made him understand that they had made a terrible mistake by bringing this human to their capital world. The reports described a species that was unlike any other known in the galaxy. Humans did not just fight when they had to. They seemed to actively seek out conflict and excelled at warfare with an intensity that defied all logic. They would charge into battle against impossible odds and refuse to surrender even when facing certain death. Their military tactics were studied in war colleges across the galaxy as examples of how inferior numbers could defeat superior forces through pure determination and tactical brilliance. Jin Woo grandfather had been specifically mentioned in several of these reports as an example of typical human military behavior. During the Korean War, he had single-handedly defended a strategic position against an entire enemy regiment for 3 days without food, water, or ammunition. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found him still fighting with improvised weapons surrounded by the bodies of enemies who had tried to overrun his position. The genetic markers in Jin Woo DNA suggested that he had inherited not just his grandfather's physical capabilities, but also the psychological traits that made human soldiers so devastatingly effective in combat. The report concluded that humans were potentially the most dangerous military species in the known galaxy, but had been largely peaceful since joining the galactic community. General Mordak realized that by capturing Jin Woo and forcing him to fight in their arena, they had awakened something that had been dormant in the human population for generations. They had reminded the galaxy that humans were not just farmers and merchants, but descendants of warriors who had once conquered their own world through superior military tactics. The general immediately ordered that Jin Woo be removed from the arena and released, but Sub-Commander Kelvis informed him that this would not be possible. The gladiator matches were controlled by the Civilian Entertainment Guild, and massive betting pools had already formed around the human next fight. Canceling the matches now would cause riots and economic chaos that could threaten the stability of the government. As general, Mordak contemplated their situation, reports began arriving from intelligence agents across the galaxy. Human colonies that had been peaceful and compliant for decades were suddenly showing signs of organized resistance movements. Word was somehow spreading through human communities that one of their own was being used for alien entertainment, and the response was swift and coordinated. The general looked down at the arena where maintenance crews were cleaning up the blood and preparing for the next fight, and realized that they had made an enemy of the most dangerous species in the galaxy, all because they had failed to recognize a simple metal dog tag for what it really was: a symbol of humanity capacity for warfare. Emergency alarms echoed through the corridors of Vorthon Command as intelligence reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human settlements that had been quiet for decades were suddenly buzzing with activity, and military analysts were detecting the formation of organized resistance cells on dozens of worlds. The news that a human was being forced to fight in gladiator matches had spread through their communities faster than anyone thought possible. General Mordak stood in the central command chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing troop movements and communication intercepts from human colonies. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying. Humans were not just angry about Jin Woo's situation, they were organizing for war with the same methodical precision that had made their ancestors legendary. Throughout the galaxy, Sub-Commander Kelvis activated a secure terminal and began pulling classified files that had been sealed for over 2 centuries. The information contained in these reports had been gathered during the early days of human contact with galactic civilization, when explorers had first discovered Earth and studied its history. What they had learned had frightened them so much that most of the Reports were classified at the highest levels. The files painted a picture of a species that had spent thousands of years in almost constant warfare against itself. Humans had developed military technology and tactics through endless conflicts that had raged across their homeworld for millennia. They had created weapons of mass destruction, capable of sterilizing entire planets, and had come within moments of using them to destroy their own civilization. But it was not just their technology that made humans dangerous, it was their psychology and their approach to warfare. Other species fought to defend territory or resources or to establish dominance. Humans fought for abstract concepts like honor and freedom and justice, and they would die for these ideas without hesitation. They had a capacity for sacrifice and determination that other species found incomprehensible. The Korean War that Jinwoo's grandfather had fought in was just one example of typical human military behavior. Soldiers had held positions against impossible odds, not because they had to, but because they believed it was their duty. Small units of human fighters had repeatedly defeated much larger forces through superior tactics and sheer refusal to give up. General Mordak read report after report describing human military actions that defied all logical analysis. Soldiers who had continued fighting after being mortally wounded. Units that had achieved victory despite being outnumbered by ratios of 10 to 1 or more, commanders who had turned certain defeat into stunning victory through tactical innovations that other species had never considered. One report described a human military leader named Alexander, who had conquered most of the known world with a relatively small army. Another told of soldiers called Marines who had specialized in the most dangerous types of combat and had never been defeated in any major engagement. The reports concluded that humans were simply better at warfare than any other known species. But perhaps most frightening of all was the discovery that human civilians could be transformed into effective soldiers with relatively little training. Every human carried the genetic and psychological traits that made them potentially deadly in combat. Even farmers and shopkeepers could become formidable fighters when properly motivated and organized. Sub-Commander Kelvis activated a communication link to intelligence agents stationed near human colonies and requested immediate status reports. The responses that came back confirmed their worst fears. Human communities were not just organizing, they were displaying the same tactical coordination and strategic thinking that had made their military forces legendary on the agricultural world of New Harmony. Human farmers had somehow acquired military equipment and were establishing defensive positions around their settlements. On the mining colony of Beta Centauri, human workers had organized into military units and were conducting training exercises using equipment that should not have been available to civilians. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Their defensive preparations followed textbook military procedures, and their communication protocols showed sophisticated understanding of operational security. It was as if the knowledge and instincts of their warrior ancestors had been dormant in their DNA, waiting for the right trigger to awaken them. General Mordak realized that Jinwoo's capture and forced participation in the arena had been that trigger. The humiliation of seeing one of their own treated as entertainment for alien amusement had activated something primal in the human psyche, and now the entire species was preparing for war. Meanwhile, in the depths of the arena, Jinwoo was unknowingly proving every frightening theory about human military capability. In his cell, he had begun teaching combat techniques to the other prisoners, using hand signals and demonstrations to overcome language barriers. The old warrior Vel watched in amazement as the young human transformed a group of scared and demoralized beings into something resembling a military unit. Jinwoo had no formal military training beyond basic self-defense courses, but he seemed to instinctively understand tactics and leadership. He organized the prisoners into teams assigned roles based on their individual capabilities and established a communication system using simple gestures that everyone could understand. Within hours, he had created a functional fighting force out of beings who had given up hope. The other prisoners began to look to Jinwoo as their leader, and he accepted this responsibility with the same quiet determination his grandfather had shown during the Korean War. He did not know that his actions were being monitored by Vorthon intelligence, or that his natural military leadership was confirming their worst fears about human capabilities. As night fell on the capital world, General Mordak made the decision that would change the course of galactic history. He activated emergency military protocols and began mobilizing the Vorthon fleet for what he believed would be an inevitable war with humanity. The report he sent to the Imperial Council was brief but chilling. The humans had been awakened and the galaxy would never be the same. The arena gates opened on Jin Woo's second day of combat, and the crowd expected to see a broken human facing certain death against 3 opponents who had been specifically chosen to ensure his destruction. The betting pools heavily favored the alien gladiators, who were all experienced fighters with multiple victories. But the spectators were about to witness something that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Jin Woo walked onto the sand, followed by 3 other prisoners, who moved in perfect formation despite having no common language beyond the hand signals he had taught them in their cells. Vel, the old scarred warrior, walked at his right side carrying a makeshift spear crafted from a broken cell bar. An insectoid creature called Nexus moved on his left, armed with improvised armor made from torn clothing and metal scraps. Behind them came a massive furry being named Gromax, who had fashioned a shield from a piece of wall plating. The crowd fell silent as they realized that the prisoners were working together in a way that had never happened before in arena history. Gladiator matches were supposed to be individual contests, where fighters competed against each other or against arena creatures, not coordinated military operations. But Jin Woo had transformed his fellow prisoners into something resembling a military unit, using nothing but natural leadership ability and tactical instincts inherited from his warrior ancestors. Their 3 opponents were veteran gladiators who had each won at least a dozen fights. The first was a reptilian creature with poisonous claws, the second was a heavily armored beast that looked like a walking tank, and the third was a fast, agile fighter with razor-sharp tentacles that could strike from long distance. These gladiators had been chosen specifically because their different fighting styles would make coordination between opponents impossible. But Jin Woo had spent the night studying his enemies through the small window in his cell, and had developed a battle plan that took advantage of his team's superior organization and tactical discipline. He used hand signals to position his fighters in a defensive formation that protected their weaknesses, while maximizing their strengths. The horn sounded to begin the battle, and instead of charging forward like individual fighters seeking personal glory, Jin Woo team moved as a coordinated unit with each member playing a specific role. Vel used his makeshift spear to keep the tentacled creature at distance while Nexus flanked around to attack its blind spot. Gromax raised his improvised shield to block attacks from the armored creature, while Jin Woo engaged the reptilian fighter with hit and run tactics. The crowd watched in amazement as the prisoners executed military maneuvers that should have been impossible for beings who had never trained together. The tentacled gladiator found itself unable to use its reach advantage because every time it attacked one target, another prisoner would strike it from a different angle. The armored creature discovered that its thick plating was useless when 3 opponents coordinated their attacks to strike weak points simultaneously. Within minutes, all 3 veteran gladiators lay defeated on the bloody sand while Jin Woo team suffered only minor injuries. The arena fell completely silent as 50,000 spectators tried to understand what they had just witnessed. This had not been a gladiator match, but a military engagement fought with precision and tactical excellence that rivaled the best military units in the galaxy. In the royal viewing box, General Mordak watched the impossible victory and felt his worst fears confirmed. This human boy was not just a skilled fighter, but a natural military commander who could turn any group into an effective fighting force given enough time and motivation. If one untrained human could accomplish this much with a handful of alien prisoners, what could an entire human military do when properly organized and equipped? Emergency communication channels throughout Vorthon space began carrying reports that confirmed the general darkest suspicions. Human colonies across the galaxy were no longer hiding their military preparations. Reconnaissance flights over human settlements were detecting defensive fortifications, training facilities, and stockpiles of weapons that had appeared seemingly overnight. On the industrial world of Kepler Station, human workers had seized control of manufacturing facilities and were producing military equipment using techniques that suggested advanced knowledge of weapons technology. On the research colony of Proxima Base, human scientists had mysteriously developed new communication systems that allowed instant coordination between settlements separated by hundreds of light years. Most disturbing of all, intelligence agents reported that human civilians were displaying tactical, knowledge and organizational skills that matched or exceeded those of professional military units from other species. It was as if every human carried the dormant memories of their species. Violent history and Jinwu situation had awakened those memories across their entire civilization. General Mordak activated the emergency military communication network and sent a priority message to all Vorthon fleet commanders throughout the galaxy. The message was brief, but its implications were staggering. Humanity had transitioned from peaceful colonists to organized military force in less than 72 hours, and they were doing it with the same systematic efficiency that had made their ancestors the most feared warriors in known space. As reports continued to flood in from intelligence sources, the true scope of human military capability became clear. They were not just organizing random resistance movements, but implementing a coordinated strategy that suggested central planning and sophisticated command structure. Human settlements were establishing supply lines, defensive positions, and communication networks that would have taken other species months or years to develop. Back in the arena, Jinwu stood over his defeated opponents and touched the empty space where his grandfather dog tag had once hung. He did not know that the simple piece of metal had already changed the course of galactic history, or that his natural military leadership was inspiring humans throughout the galaxy to remember what they were capable of when properly motivated. The crowd began to cheer, not for the death and destruction they had expected, but for the tactical brilliance they had witnessed. Some aliens were shouting approval, while others sat in stunned silence trying to comprehend the implications of what they had seen. But all of them understood that they had witnessed something historic, the moment when the galaxy remembered why humans had once been considered the most dangerous species in known space. General Mordak looked down at the young human standing victorious on the arena floor and realized that it was already too late to prevent what was coming. The awakening had begun, and there was no way to stop it. Jinwu and his grandfather Dogtag had reminded an entire species of their warrior heritage, and the galaxy would never be the same again.